In our first reading today from the book of Wisdom, we are told that as humans, we hardly understand the things of earth. And so how could we ever seek to understand the things of heaven? This is a very wise statement. There's so many different things in this world in our simple lives that are beyond our personal understanding. Unless you're trained in a certain field, you probably don't know as much as an expert in that field. This is why you take your car to a mechanic when it breaks down and you don't necessarily fix it yourself, because you're not trained. You don't understand the mechanics of the working of the car, or you call a plumber or somebody to work on your air conditioning unit. This is why you go to the doctor. It's the same thing, because you're not an expert necessarily in those fields. So you need somebody who's more knowledgeable than you in that natural area in order to assist you. Yet, when we think about it, how many of us and how many people in the world think we understand God and spiritual things, even though we're certainly not experts? You can talk to anybody on the street and they will give you their opinion about religion, about morality, about God. Oh, no, there's no God. Oh, yes, there's a God, and this is the kind of God he is. They all think they know. It's so easy for us to be so convinced about these quote-unquote heavenly or religious beliefs that we hold, and yet, on a certain level, admit our ignorance about earthly things. And yet the Book of Wisdom tells us, if we're ignorant about things of earth, how on earth could we understand the things of heaven? This just shows us the necessity of humility. I have to accept the fact that I do not understand spiritual things. I do not understand the mind of the Lord. I do not understand the spiritual life, certainly not as well as I need to. This is typically why we go to quote-unquote experts. And that's what clergy are supposed to be. We're supposed to be the experts, at least Catholic priests, on Catholic theology, Catholic religion. But priests are just like mechanics, right? I mean, sadly, people are people. So you may need to get a second opinion. You don't necessarily just take the recommendation of the first mechanic you bring your car to. Maybe he's got another agenda. Maybe he's just trying to make an extra buck. Sadly, that's true in any religion. Even though we have to go to experts to gain wisdom and understanding in dealing with these difficult questions of life, we can't just trust every quote-unquote expert we go to. But on our part, what we need is humility. And it's not something we necessarily have, especially when we're suffering, isn't it? When I'm suffering, I usually do one of a couple of things. I blame God. Where are you, God? Why have you done this to me? What did I do wrong? I get upset, frustrated with God because of the pain or difficulty that I'm bearing at this time. I may turn from prayer, may stop going to church, depending on the degree of suffering I'm enduring. And by my actions, by my words, I am clearly making conclusions about God. God must have this intention, as if I can know his mind. God must be doing this thing or not doing this thing, as if I can pass judgment on him. And this shows, importantly, a lack of humility in my spiritual life. Instead of getting on my knees and saying, God, why is this happening to me? Seeking understanding, calling the priest or someone who may be more spiritually knowledgeable than you and asking them, we make our own conclusions. We self-diagnose, and then we usually don't do a great job at it, and we mess up the car, or we mess up our bodies. In this case, we mess up our souls. That's why humility is so important in regards to even just intellectual religious matters. And we have to approach our faith from that standpoint of humility. I thank the Lord daily for my ministry as a priest, because it forces me, obviously, to spend a lot of time in prayer, to confront these issues. And so while I'm in prayer, especially when I'm suffering, I'm forced to ask God that question. I'm forced to recognize my ignorance, my lack of understanding. Now, I'm supposed to be the expert in this room, aren't I? And yet there's still so much that I don't know. And yet I don't have to worry about that because the Lord can teach me so that I can teach you, as long as I'm humble. And I notice that in my prayer life. And it's something St. Thomas Aquinas once said. He was one of the greatest intellects in the Catholic world, if not the history at large. St. Thomas Aquinas said that when he is meditating upon one of the mysteries of the faith, what he'll do is he'll try to understand it, he'll research, he'll study other people's writings on it. He'll think about it and try to analyze it with his mind, but if he gets to a point in which he just can't understand it, like there's some aspect of it that is beyond his comprehension, this is what he says to do. He says, I get down on my knees and I bow my forehead to the floor in humility before the mystery of God. So it's okay to kind of bash your intellect up against a truth that you're trying to understand, to wrestle with that truth. But at a certain point, when it has proved stronger than you, you must bow humbly before it. That's the right response. And God may give you understanding, he may not, either way. But especially when we're suffering, the last thing we want to do is humble ourselves. We want answers. We want the pain taken away. And yet, rightly so, those are the most perfect moments to humble ourselves before the Lord. Now, in our gospel today, Jesus gives us a very difficult teaching. The English translation isn't great, at least not in this one word. He says, if anyone comes to me without hating father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and even life, he cannot be my disciple. Now, the word hate being translated here is not the word hate as we understand it in English. It should be more akin to renounce, as we hear in the last part of the gospel, meaning willing to give up or not primary in your life, make it a secondary love. Jesus is telling us, if you don't love me before everyone else in your life and yourself, you cannot be my disciple. He also says, if you don't pick up your cross daily and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. And lastly, he says, if you do not renounce all of your possessions, you cannot be my disciple. You can't follow me. Now, discipulate, like it's a Latin word that means to listen to. A disciple is one who listens to the Lord. The Lord is saying, you can't listen to me. And it's not just a passive act of listening, it's listening and then obeying. But you can't listen to me, the Lord says, if I'm not the most important thing in your life, you're willing to suffer for me, and you renounce all your possessions for me. That's a profound statement. You cannot hear me, he's telling us. You cannot hear me unless I am absolutely first in your life. Now, how could he make such a statement? Certainly, if he was just a man, that's ridiculous. Even if he was a great man and a prophet, I'm not going to love him more than my mother. But he's not just a man. He is God, the eternal, omnipotent, all-loving being who created the universe. In fact, he continues to hold the universe in existence. And this is something I was meditating on this week. One of the great scientific questions that honest scientists will ask is, why is there anything in the universe? Why is there anything? Why is there all this stuff, stars, planets, gas, molecules, atoms? Why does this stuff exist? And why is there not nothing? Where did the universe come from? Now, science can't answer that. It's a philosophical question. Certainly, religion tries to answer it. But it's a philosophical question. Why does anything exist? In fact, you can also ask the question, why does it continue to exist? When was the last time you really thought about it? Well, yes, this communion rail exists. It was made of a living tree at one point. Now it's dead wood, carved and shaped. you can say, well, it's there, Father Miller. It exists. Yes, but why? Where does its existence come from? This is a very important question. Why are you here? Right now at this moment. You say, well, my parents gave birth to me so-and-so years ago. No, because then the question is, well, why are they there? Where did they come from? And then where did their parents come from? And you go back to Adam and Eve, and the question remains, where does existence itself come from? And the fathers of the church teach us that the reason anything in the universe, ourselves included, exists is because God is constantly willing our existence. Meaning right now, at this moment, the Lord is thinking about you and thinking about every atom and molecule in your body, all the quarks and subquarks and everything. And he is empowering them with existence. And if God wasn't doing that, what would happen to you and all the molecules and the universe? He would blink out of existence. So the only reason the universe exists is because God is willing it constantly on every single level. Now, this is a fascinating meditation. Not only biologically, but even spiritually, my soul exists because God wills it so. And you could say, well, God could have just willed it, 100 million years ago and it's continued to exist. No, that's not possible. God, moment by moment, continues to hold all that is in existence. And if he stopped thinking about me for one moment, you would not even know I had ever existed. You would completely forget about me. Even your memory of me is dependent upon God's willful existence. This shows us on a just biological level the dependency we have on God. And if we think about that for a moment, that God is constantly thinking about me and every molecule of my body to hold me in existence, that's a profound idea. That means I could never be forgotten by God. Because if I was, I would cease to be. Now, you might ask the question, how could God do that for all human beings, and in fact, every molecule in the universe? How could God think about each one of them and have his focus totally on each thing? So there's a story I learned a while ago, and it helps to illustrate the mind of God from our perspective. Because a lot of people fail to realize that God is outside of time, that God is not subject to the limitations of time as we are. So I want to tell you a little story and then ask you a question. Sarah was sitting on her couch and the doorbell rang. Sarah got up and opened the door. Now, how long do you think it might have taken Sarah to get up and open the door from the moment she heard the doorbell ring? Well, it depends how far her couch was from the door, right? So, 15 seconds, maybe a minute if it's a big house. Within 5 minutes at the absolute most. Did you know it took Sarah 10 years to get up from that couch and open that door after hearing the doorbell ring? 10 years. You say, Father Miller, how is that possible? Well, it's quite simple. Sarah is a character in a story. And the author of that story stopped writing after the line, she heard the doorbell ring, and didn't write another word for 10 years. 10 years later, took a pen and ink and finished it. You see, time is relative. Time is dependent upon the characters involved or outside of time. For us who exist in time, we only know moment to moment. That's all our minds can comprehend. God is the author. He's outside of time, which means time is nothing to him. He can speed it up, slow it down, and stop it. He's not limited by space or time. And so it's not even difficult for the Lord to think of each and every one of you at every moment, holding you consciously in his thoughts, willing your existence and your being, even while you are suffering. And you say, well, why does God will us to exist even in the midst of suffering? And that's difficult, isn't it? That's really the difficult question that we deal with. We don't mind God loving us when everything's going well, God holding us in being, when the path is smooth. But when it gets rocky, and we're afraid and depressed and anxious, we're in physical pain, then suddenly, where are you, God? As if he's not right there. Now, it's okay to ask the Lord, why? Why this suffering? Why this cross? But Jesus has already given us a partial answer to that, hasn't he, in the gospel? He says, you must love me first, above all else, and you must be willing to carry any cross after me, if you would be my disciple, if you would learn to hear me, to listen to me. And that's really the first stage of all discipleship. Before I can understand the mind of the Lord and why he does what he does in my life, I first have to listen to and obey the Lord. I have to learn to do what he says before I can understand why he said it. And I preached on suffering and various aspects of it many times. But the simple truth is this. If God truly loves us, as much as Jesus has shown us, and if his words are true, then he has asked me to suffer with him, like him. And Jesus wasn't guilty of any sin that would have brought about his own suffering. He was innocent. And so you see, for you and for me, whether we are guilty or innocent is irrelevant as a Christian. We are called to suffer like Christ. So the answer to why am I suffering is quite simple. It has nothing to do with my guilt or innocence. I'm suffering because there is sin in the world, just like Jesus. He was guiltless and suffered. And that may be difficult to understand. That may be a challenge to accept, because we don't like suffering. But remind yourself, do you think Jesus liked it? Do you think he thought, oh joy, I get to be born into the world and to suffer and die? No, he did it because of you. Because he loves you, because he made you, because he holds you in the palm of his hand. And you are more important to him than even his own life. And if he is more important to you than your own life, then you will be willing to suffer anything for him. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.